How has shaped now who you are right now and what you're doing right now?
I don't necessarily need a job title to validate me. If you give people lots of time to develop a new idea, they'll wait until the last 10 minutes anyway. People create so much more because they're up against somebody else. They want to shine more. I think great leaders in business are people who make decisions relentlessly, lots of decisions.
We don't open up enough because we think that maybe it's boring talking about the business or it's not something interesting.
That idea of turning up, it might be a social drink. I've achieved more than I ever could have expected to or wanted to when I was sitting writing horoscopes age 17. You know, the kind of thing, it was almost like the best teacher you've ever had at school. It just unlocks something. You go, oh, I see. What had driven me towards becoming a CEO again was...
Are you clear about what's going to be your future as a leader? So whether you're an executive, whether you're a CEO, at some point in life, you will definitely ask yourself a question: what do I need to do now? And who I want to be. So in this episode, I had an incredible opportunity to talk to Mike Soutar, a business leader in the UK. And with him, we went through his incredible career journey and understanding what are the big important lessons from a leadership mindset perspective that brought Mike to incredible success up to the position of a CEO of the Evening Startup. So stay with us because that's going to be an incredible episode. So Mike, it's a pleasure to have you with me today. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, Andrea.
Mike, you are quite famous. You know, if for those people, they still believe in popularity in that way, but you know, you're famous because you have been in one of the most attractive, compelling programs at BBC for many years, you know, The Apprentice. So people might remember you from that experience. How was the experience be there?
Well, I've been doing it now for 12 years. I mean, the first year that I did it, it would kind of came out of the blue. And I thought, well, what an amazing thing to tell my grandchildren about. And then they called me for the second year and they still keep calling me every year. It's a real privilege to do because it's very high profile and I enjoy it. I mean, part of my job has always been to either write or to assess business plans and to interview candidates either for jobs or to interview, in a sense, people who are pitching for investment. Yeah. So this is really just an extension of that. And every year there are 5 final candidates, which means there are 5 completely different sectors of business that most of which I'll never have been involved in. So it's always a challenge every year in the 5 or 6 days I get before the interviews when I get the business plans and their applications to be part of the process and their CVs. Is I then need to learn completely different parts of business that I don't know about. So at that time, I often reach out to people who I've maybe never spoken to before and say, you know, maybe I'm working on
this business or
waste,
this industry.
You know the waste management industry, and they say, why are you calling it? Well, I can't exactly tell you. They go, oh, I see. So for me, it's an education. And then when you're in the room, it feels like just you and the candidate. And it is all for real. There's no scripting within this. I know the lines of inquiry that I'm going to use. I know the way that I want this interview to go, but I have them for 25 to 35 minutes. And it is just really just me and them, even though, of course, in the room there are cameras and sound recorders and so on. I'm never, ever aware of those.
Interesting. We'll come back to this because I'm interested to hear maybe some lessons, across the years that you learn by doing so, especially from a business standpoint. But let's, walk a little bit, through your very interesting story and experience because, when we chatted together before, but also, looking at your profile, your story, I mean, you really started with, as many, I think, with the passion of journalism. Is that right?
Yeah, when I was in my final year at school, I dropped a couple of subjects and I asked the headmaster, would it be okay if I did a school magazine? And we'd never had, in the history of our school, we'd never had a school magazine. And he said yes. So that gave me something to do in all this spare time. And I think probably at that point I connected with the idea of magazines and print and journalism and publishing in a completely new way and the responsibility of making that happen. And really, when I was 17, my only ambition was to be a physical education teacher. Like, I loved my rugby and I played football and I did athletics.
You're now on the board on the Scottish Rugby Union too. It's a kind of full circle.
It's a dream come true.
There you go.
I'm now on the board of Scottish Rugby Union, which, for somebody, I started playing rugby when I was 11 years old. I could never have dreamt that I could be a part of helping to shape the future of a game that I love in a country that I love. As it happens, I wasn't accepted into PE college, and I also wasn't accepted into the universities that I wanted to go to do English or history. And I happened across an ad in a local paper for editorial assistants for magazines at venerable old publishing company in Dundee called DC Thomson. And so when I was 17, I got a job there, and my first job was writing horoscopes for romantic fiction magazine for elderly ladies.
There you go.
Age 17. And then the beauty editor left 3 months later, and so I was promoted to being the beauty editor. So
Wow.
I certainly had ever since I've come into my career, I suppose I've been confronted with interesting challenges to do things that I wouldn't know about, so I have to learn quickly.
Well, interesting. An interesting twist, given then, the career that you developed for yourself. Very interesting. So horoscope, then beauty, and then you started more into the business area. So that's your journalism moved a little bit more into the traditional, business, I suppose, but then more into the media side, right?
Yeah, so I kind of made my way up. I left Dundee after working there for a couple of years because I got a job in London as a press officer at Virgin Records. I was a terrible press officer. Heaven knows how I got the job in the first place, and I was sacked after a year because I was so bad. But rather than go back to Scotland with my tail between my legs, I thought, no, I can't bear the humiliation of that. So I basically went around all the reviews editors and magazine editors and music paper editors that I'd made friends with, and got freelance work from them, and did reviews of gigs and albums and singles and everything else. Got a job on a massive teenage pop magazine called Smash Hits, which was a legendary magazine back in the 80s and the 90s. Having got a staff writer job there when I was about 20 years old, I rose to becoming the editor of it by the time I was 22. So I took on this editorship of this magazine that was selling 500, 600,000 copies every fortnight, with a team of people, 2/3 of whom were older than me. And I had the job of leading the team and managing them and editing the magazine every fortnight. So it was a real baptism of fire.
Interesting. I think that experience has shaped your entrepreneurial spirit too, because you started to, you create that business for yourself, right?
So it was edited Smash Hits. I edited FHM, which was a men's magazine, which we took from selling under 35,000 copies when it was acquired by the company I was working for, selling over 500,000 copies. I yearned to really understand the business side because I understood the creative side. I understood journalism and editing and motivates creative teams. But I was always really curious about how does this make money? How is this a business? And that was kind of kept away from me. So an opportunity came up to become the managing director of KISS, the radio station, the youth radio station in London. So I grabbed at that. I was, I think, about 30 years old at the time. And there I really learned about cash flow, about how you run a P&L. I learned about how to analyze a business from the numbers rather than from the outside, so how you kind of take those things apart. And I just found it fascinating to see what the levers were that you could pull that could create a more successful business. So that was my first real experience of being a managing director. Then I went to the States and I edited a magazine out there. Then I came back. I was headhunted to join the board of IPC, which was Britain's largest magazine publisher, and was part of the small executive team that sold that business to Time Warner for £1.15 billion. I'm sad to say that I didn't have terribly many shares in it, but those experiences of moving around, when I was in the States, I worked for an entrepreneurial publisher called Felix Dennis, and he was a real influence on me. It was the first time I'd ever worked for somebody who was an owner. Like up until then, I'd worked for people who were managers. They were just bigger managers than I was. First time I'd actually worked for an entrepreneur, and to see the difference between being a manager and an owner, and I thought that one day is what I want to do. And so after 6 years at IPC, I left and did exactly that with a business partner, a 50-50 business partner, a guy called Tim Ewington, who remains the cleverest man I've ever met.
Right. Well, that's such an amazing experience. I'm so curious actually to understand more, your learnings, going through all this. story and career. But before we get to that, the Apprentice opportunity, I think, came more or less in that time. Right? I mean, how people approach you, so why? So how did you get this opportunity?
It was, I was sitting at my desk. I was running a business that I had started with my business partner, Tim, called Shortlist Media. We'd launched a couple of free magazines. It was really getting traction. We were about 3 years into the business. We'd broken break even. We'd raised some more money. We'd moved from being kind of 5 people to, I think, probably about 65 people by that point. So really high growth. People were talking about us, but we were still a bit under the radar. And I got a phone call from some researchers who said they were doing research for a business television program on the BBC. And I said, "Oh, what, you mean The Apprentice?" And they went, "We can't possibly tell you. You'll have to sign a non-disclosure agreement." So fine. So I signed that, and they went, "Yes, it is The Apprentice." And I'd always been a massive fan of The Apprentice. I've always thought that it's done incredible things to show, particularly young people, maybe young people who didn't think that university and further education was for them, that actually you can go out and be entrepreneurial. You can create things just by being resourceful yourself. So I'd always watched it, always been a big fan of it, and they said, "Look, we're thinking of trying to do a creative task for the next series," which was series 7, and we wondered whether we could do a magazine task. And so I, having anticipated this, pitched them an idea where the candidates could come in, they would work together, they would work against each other on competing magazine concepts. Yes. We'd help them create covers and contents pages and spreads, and then we could get them printed up overnight, because obviously we had the connections to do that, and they could then take their magazine concepts and pitch them to advertisers. Whoever got the most advertising would win the task. Whoever didn't was the loser, and one of you will get fired. Roll credits. So they loved this idea, and that's what happened. They came in, and when they came in, they got me to do a piece to camera when the candidates came in, just briefing the candidates. Right. Which was kind of weird. I hadn't anticipated it, and I think in retrospect it was something of a screen test. Maybe. Because a couple of days later I got a call saying, "Could you come and meet Alan?" And I'd never met Lord Sugar before. "Could you come and meet him?" And so we met, and we had lunch, and he just asked me lots of questions about me and my career. Bit like this, really. And then at the end said, "You're probably wondering why I'm asking you this." Oh, yeah. And he said, "Well, I'm changing the prize for the winner from being a job, Amstrad, to being an investment of £250,000. And so I'm looking to refresh my interview panel with people who have some entrepreneurial experience. Would you be interested?" Absolutely. Exactly.
So that's amazing, really amazing. And by the way, the concept that you created, which I think is fantastic, is now very popular in a team building exercise. For example, sometimes when I talk to some senior leaders, they want to do some work with their own teams. Sometimes they suggested very similar exercises or projects to create, more collaboration and cooperation with people.
Yes.
So it's a different purpose.
Yes.
But, it makes the point of working together for something meaningful.
Yes.
Which I think is very valuable.
It's interesting. When I was going back slightly in my career, when I was at IPC, I became the editorial director of the company, and we had almost 100 magazines in the company. So at least theoretically, I was the top editor of all of those. But my main job was to create new titles, new brands, new launches in print and in digital and in broadcast. And one of the main development approaches that we took was to develop quickly, because if you give people lots of time to develop a new idea, they'll wait until the last 10 minutes anyway. Like, they'll sit around and drink coffee and make jokes. Exactly. And then eventually, with 10 minutes to go, they'll go, "Oh, better do something now." So do it quickly. Only give them the 10 minutes at the end rather than the day that leads up to it. And secondly, to do it in competition. So I would always separate out development teams. I would always give them the same or a very similar brief, get them to work separately, and tell them that this time tomorrow or this time next week, you're going to present. So they knew they had to present. So often I would get people in for them to present to, and often I would actually get the other team in there as well, so that both teams would see each other's presentations. And then we would take what they had created, because in competition, people create so much more. more because they're up against somebody else. They want to shine more. You take the best things, you take them in then to research, into focus groups, and then you take the best of it, and often you would give team A the output of team B's response, and team B would get the output of team A's, so that they would then have to work on solving other people's problems. And it was an extraordinary way to create volumes and volumes of really innovative work because it's competitive.
I bet. That's very good, interesting. And I run for, again, very different purposes. But I run a kind of fake competition between two teams within the same executive team on an organization, as you might imagine, using the MasterChef idea. Just putting two teams together in time-bound exercise to come up with something, which is very powerful to really not only to boost creativity and foster collaboration, but also interesting to experience how it's hard working together when you are really bonded by time or pressure or expectation, which I think is important, when it comes to, now that we're moving more into the leadership element of that, into the creating something extraordinary as a team, which is great. So very quickly, there is one anecdote, from your experience at Apprentice is worth mentioning, something that is still stuck in your mind in terms of an experience?
I mean, each interview is very different. I've done 12 years times 5. So I've done 60 different interviews on screen, which seems now like an extraordinary amount. The ones that tend to stick are the ones that go viral. And thanks to social media, I'm often confronted with clips of me which have been used as memes for other things. Right. Created a hangover cure. This was the business that he wanted Lord Sugar to invest £250,000 in. And so, whether you believe that a hangover cure can work or not, he had launched it. He was selling it on Amazon. And so, he had a business to invest in. And so I looked at his business plan, and he said he'd sold 40,000 units of this. And then I always like to go the extra mile when I do my research. So I was going and I was scrolling down and looking at things. I was thinking, there's something not quite right about this. And I went onto his Amazon page and I scrolled right down the bottom to the terms and conditions. And right at the very bottom, he said, more than 1 million units sold. And I thought, oh, well, one of these is right. And I know which one it is. It's the 40,000. So I confront him with this in the interview. I say, so how many units have you sold then? 40,000. He said, oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Why does it say on your Amazon page that you sold 1 million units? And you can see his face. On the whole, they're just absolutely dropping. And instead of saying, oh, you know what, that was an exaggeration, that was silly, at which point, it might never have even made the screen if he'd said that, he denied it. Oh, I don't know who wrote that. And I said, well, can you tell me who wrote that? And we had about 30 to 40 seconds of me saying, look, you wrote this, didn't you? And him going, well, I could have written it. I'm thinking, he's the only person in his company. Nobody else could have written it.
And you're still responsible.
And then eventually, exactly. And then eventually he said, yes, it was me. I did write it. And you're thinking, wow, the fact that he dragged it out so much, that's probably, so what can you learn from those things? The golden rules of any kind of pitching, of any kind of interview situation are, you have to tell the truth. You have to be honest. Now, that's not saying, so when you have made a mistake or when you've done something bad, then you just need to explain why that was and what you learned from it. Trying to cover things up is the worst thing you can do. It breaks trust. He didn't get the £250,000.
I'm not surprised. I still believe authenticity and be open, transparent, really build trust right now. So I think it's a great lesson because I think we assume that everybody is and everybody, embrace this, sort of principles and values. But the reality is we're still living in a business, in a world, generally speaking, where people are not authentic and they unfortunately lie, which I think is important to say. So let's transition then to your big experience because then you became, a CEO of the Evening Standard. So after such more different experiences and then more entrepreneurial experiences, then you became a CEO of an important, newspaper. How was that experience? It didn't last too long. And then COVID, I think, hit at more or less the same time after.
Yeah, sure. There were various different circumstances. Just looking at the timeline, I had exited the business, led the very successful sale of Shortlist Media to DC Thompson. which is where I started my career, in an amazing circular way. And they took it on. They'd been investors in the business from the start, alongside a lot of other independent investors. And so everybody was very happy. It was a great exit for everybody. They were happy with what they'd acquired. The investors and the shareholders were very happy with what they got. So I had a couple of years where I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do personally. And it was just a bit of a dilemma. Did I want to start something new again, or what did I want to do? Did I want to be a consultant, or did I want a full-time job? And I couldn't decide. And actually this opportunity came along about 2 years in, at a point where I thought, I know what I need. I need the validation of external status. That's really what it boils down to. And so here was somebody coming along and offering me the job of a CEO in a very famous, really struggling business, highly loss-making business, but a really well-known brand. And I had a vision for it and thought, I think I can really turn this around, both as a business and a brand. I think I know what I want to do with this. So I jumped at the opportunity. I didn't really do my due diligence, if I'm fair. I just got excited by it and thought, yeah, this will be great. It turns out there were a couple of things that weren't great. One was my vision for how I wanted to run the business wasn't shared by the ownership structure, and there had been a great deal of ambiguity about that at the start. But 6 months in, I realised that actually what they wanted to do with their brand that they owned and what I wanted to do were completely opposite.
Yeah.
So therefore, that wasn't a fight that I was ever going to win or really wanted to have. So I made up my mind there. And also I realised that actually what had driven me towards becoming a CEO again was so I could have something on my business card. Not because when I go to social occasions, I want to flash my business card and I want people to ask me about being a chief executive or whatever.
Right.
But more because it's kind of a barrier. People say to you, and I think whether this is truer for men or not, I don't know, but I know more men who have difficulty with this than women who seem to be more relaxed. But that idea of turning up, it might be a social drinks, it might be, your kids go to a certain school and you go to a social event and you meet somebody for the first time and they say, what do you do? And if you don't have an answer for that, so it was just...
You don't feel like you're part of...
Yeah, what's my purpose?
Right.
So I can now see in retrospect that I was unusually driven by the need to have a status that would allow me to play it off really casually. I wouldn't talk about it, but just go, yeah, I'm CEO of the Evening Standard, and then move on from there. I think the other thing that I missed, which drove me towards it, so really 3 things here, was the power of decision making. I really loved... and I think I was good at making decisions as a CEO. Because I think great leaders in business are people who make decisions relentlessly, lots of decisions, very frequently, in the absence of full data.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've just got to. You can't wait to find out everything before you then make a decision about the direction of travel for your organisation. And I'd had 2 years where I hadn't made any decisions I felt that were really at all important and didn't affect anything or anybody's lives. And so I think I really missed that. And that was one of the things that drove me back to CEO. But the disparity in our strategic view of the future meant that I could see there was no future. Then COVID happened. So my last act before I left the job of CEO of the Evening Standard was to turn the distribution network on its head. Something, because of shortlist media, I understood free distribution really well. And what I did with our distribution department and with the third-party distributors was take all of the merchandisers who would stand outside all of the tube stations and turn them into an army of newspaper delivery guys.
Right.
So we created across all of central London, we created basically the world's biggest newspaper round, and we would deliver copies through the doors of 500,000.
Sounds like a kind of guerrilla marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
So
every single
door
day.
and
every single day.
So
the brand kept going. It was a real rallying cry. I think it did some amazing work actually during COVID, and as a business, it didn't die. and I think it would have died had we not done that. So that was my final act as CEO. And then I was able to leave. The thing it gave me was a greater sense of my own agency, of knowing that I don't necessarily need a job title to validate me. Which seems crazy, right? I've had a decent career. I shouldn't really need it.
Yet?
Yeah, it's an instinctive thing.
By the way, that's incredible sharing, because to me, you were talking a few minutes ago about authenticity and vulnerability. That's a great example, of sharing your experience. It's also very common to see people that have been appointed as a CEO in organizations very soon they realized they were not the right fit, because especially in either family-owned businesses or organization where the ownership is very present and they have a specific idea, and CEOs, they have a completely different direction. So it's really difficult to work together. So we had on the show a great guy, working in a clothing industry, and he shared a very similar experience. So he said, I came with this idea, there was a vision to create something extraordinary. But then as soon as you start creating your own vision, then you started to see there are different visions, and then it's difficult then to align and work together. So I think it's better leaving earlier than later when you realize that is the situation. So I think it's fair. So I think it sounds like this experience that you had at Even Standard has probably started to build more or create more self-awareness for yourself about you, where you're heading, all this reflection about the title, the status, does it really matter? Is an expression my real value is just something, for others rather than for myself. How that reflection that happened in 2020, more or less.
Yeah.
Right? How has shaped now who you are right now and what you're doing right now?
So I suppose what I realised more than anything else was I couldn't leave it up to other people or other people's companies or jobs to create my identity, to give me purpose. I had to give myself purpose. So I thought, right, I want to now build a really satisfying, varied, non-executive director portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at other people who'd done it and spoke to some other people who I admired who'd done it, and their advice was just do things where you think you can personally make a really big difference through your actions and your opinions, things that you're really, really passionate about, things where you want to create change, things that have needs where the organizations can own up to what their needs are. And I thought that was just really good. That was really good advice. So my first big non-executive directorship was the V&A Museum in Scotland, which is based in Dundee, which is where I was born, and that was it was 4 years old. It was coming out of COVID. It was still trying to establish itself. It's an amazing chairman called Tim Allen, and Tim invited me to join the board amongst some of the cleverest, most creative, most brilliant people around the board table. So that was an amazing thing to do, and I was able to specifically help them when it came to some of their commercial pieces and some of the marketing and communications, and then just generally help over and above that. Then the role on the board of Scottish Rugby came. It was an absolute dream of a role to just be asked to pitch for. It was amazing walking into Murrayfield up in Edinburgh, a place I'd passed 100 times on a train, a place I'd been so many times to watch rugby, with the thought that there might be a role that could see me working inside the stadium. How exciting.
Oh, wow.
So that came up, and I was lucky enough to be offered a role on the board there. I have some investment interests, and I'm on the board of a fintech called Loop FX, which is seeking to transform institutional foreign currency exchange. It's the biggest money market in the world. There's some $7 trillion traded every single day. And these are unimaginable numbers. And Loop FX is seeking to do something that's right at the heart of that kind of the nexus of that transaction. I have an interest in a business called Tussle, which is a data business which takes data from government contracts and turns them into actionable lead generation. And I have an interest interest in a gallery, which is really an online business. It's a physical gallery, but really 95% of its revenues are online, which is Contemporary Art, which is based in East London. And over and above that, I've started to advise the leader of the Scottish Labour Party in Sarwar on kind of business and the economy. And he's somebody who I get on with very well, and I'm increasingly interested in politics. I've always kept my political beliefs and I suppose activism pretty quiet, partly because I was really busy with other things, and partly because when you're building a business, that's all you're focused on. Now I kind of feel like there's possibly an opportunity, even though I live just outside London. I haven't lived in Scotland since I was 19 years old, but I kind of feel that it's another opportunity to hopefully help shape the country and contribute to its success, because it's an amazing place, and I just want government to do the right things there.
That's really amazing. Mike, if we scroll back and look at all what we discussed today, to me it's clear how you demonstrated to yourself, not to others, but to yourself. How can you really start as a journalist, then to have really an amazing career, because you had an incredible career and you try many different things, from being an entrepreneur to work for someone else, for a big newspaper, and now working on as a board member in different activities. What are some big takeaways of your career if you look back and say, okay, that's what I think really helped me from a mindset standpoint, from a leadership standpoint?
I think the first thing, and it's not something I could have controlled, and I'm still very grateful for it, is through my career I have had mentors, not really because I asked them to be, but because they became that. Just people who would give me just really excellent advice. And that's the same thing up until today. But my first ever editor when I was 17 years old was a lovely lady called Maggie, who really helped me understand what I could give if I focused my efforts in the right way. The kind of thing, she was almost like the best teacher you've ever had at school. It just unlocks something. You go, oh, I see. I had an amazing mentor when I was editing, a guy called Mark Ellen, who was just understood how to be an editor, understood the job in fine detail. And every time I had a little crisis, which was probably most days, he would sort of calm me down. He'd put me back on the right track and go again. And I had an amazing chief executive in Sly Bailey when I joined IPC, who taught me the power of saying no. I think in my career, because I say yes to most things, I think in my career it was the first time that anybody ever said no to me straightforwardly. And I was like, oh, that's powerful, isn't it? I learned that. Felix Dennis, who was the billionaire that I worked for in the States, who has now passed away, but was so influential. I mean, he was an amazing buccaneering character. Very irascible, though, very difficult to work for, but really, really inspiring, and really inspired me. I was like, oh, okay, this is how I build a career out here. To today, I've got and Shortlist Media was Sir David Arculus, extraordinary man who was my chairman, and even today I have a guy who's an amazing coach called Tom Maloney, and Tom is a great friend of mine, has been for probably 30 years now, and we will still go for a walk every week. The idea being we're just hanging out because we're mates, but actually 40 minutes of the hour that we're walking, he's just coaching me. Because I'm going, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? But having people who are both your cheerleaders but also your mirrors is really important. That there's that famous phrase, isn't there? No man is an island. But so no person can operate on their own, and I've been so lucky to have great people around me. That's probably the thing that's been the rocket fuel in my career. It's just been great people who, for whatever reasons, have been willing to help.
Which is not surprised why we keep saying, be always surrounded by the right people, because they can really help you. And it sounds like they've been incredibly impactful, in your own journey. Anything relating more about your own mindset, your own way of seeing things that has contributed to your success?
Yeah, I'm endlessly curious. I really enjoy learning new things. I love new facts.
Right.
I'm not brilliant at retaining information, I've found. Like by comparison to other people, I am at best average. Compared to some other people, I just think, how did you remember that? How did you know
and then
that?
in the world, overload of information is not even easy anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have that skill.
Exactly. But because I'm not particularly brilliant at remembering things, I feel the need to have to reinvent them when I come to that task again. And so that lack of memory for approaches to things has turned me into a much better inventor, because I go, right, okay, I better do this then. And then you invent it. So I'm unafraid of taking something apart and putting it back together in a new way.
Nice.
I really enjoy doing those things, whether that's something very physical or an idea or a product or an organization. I'm always looking at how you could do that differently, because then I don't have to spend all the time remembering how it's supposed to be done.
Interesting. It turned, it sounds like that was kind of your success strategy of something that is missing for you. You turn it into something, incredible, useful and effective for you as a way to deal with that.
All of my school reports, all the way through, all said Michael is prone to absent-mindedness. And that's true, and it must have been irritating for some of my teachers, because I wasn't fully present in all of the things they were trying to teach me. But actually, really, I'm prone to curiosity. That's, if you want to frame that in a more positive way, that's really it. I'm just super curious about the way stuff works, and I'm keen. I'm unafraid of making mistakes. Because we all make mistakes. It's just the smarter people recognize when they've made a mistake and then change it again, and don't let it stop them in their momentum. And I'm also unafraid of walking into new situations and kind of making new friends and allies and everything else. I moved around a lot when I was growing up, and I think one of the things that gave me was a kind of an empathy, and certainly the ability to walk into a room and to be able to read the room. Who's a bit anxious, who's a bit withdrawn, who's got something to say, who's a bit angry. I can typically sense those things very, very quickly, and I can address all of those things. So it means that when I go I'll often go and run workshops for organizations, or I'll go and chair, very diverse boards or meetings of people, and it helps because I'm aware of those things, and I can draw people in and allow them to, I love a meeting that has constructive dissent. Right? That's been one of my real core beliefs in life, is create organizations and meetings and forums that have constructive dissent, where people can say what they want to say, get off their chest what they need to say, come up with solutions. Then we'll agree, or somebody will decide. Typically, one person will decide, thanks very much, I've heard all of that, this is the way we're going to go, and then everybody gets behind all of that. You've had your say, now get behind it. If you don't have constructive dissent, people will undermine things all the time, because they'll feel, well, I never got the opportunity to say it. Yes. So I'm open to that sort of conflict. Can make people uncomfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable, but I'm open to it. Come on, let's get it out. It's always much better when it's on the table, when it's out there, than when people hold on to it.
If it says the background, there is no opportunity to create something really powerful. Yeah. So I love that. And it sounds like you are really driven by curiosity to do that. Because if you didn't have that level of curiosity, maybe you would have been so effective, impactful when you are in meetings. Amazing. So we're close to the end of our conversation, but I have one critical question for you. There are many, we were talking a little bit earlier before recording. There are many people in the audience today. They are CEOs, either very ambitious, but most of them are also CEOs that have been considered seasoned. So they've been there for many years. They're maybe approaching kind of the end of their career, at least from a corporate perspective. And most of them, they're dreaming to retire, spending time playing golf or going on the beach. But the reality is, many, they want to still active, and they are really starting to ask themselves, what shall I really do next? And you have been through this process of thinking about you. Do you have any advice you would like to share and give to those people that have a brilliant career, very successful, and they don't really know what to do next? Either because, they're just approaching, their retirement plan, but also because maybe they want to change. They want to move because they're sick and tired of leading organizations, or they want to change their lifestyle. Is there any advice you'd like to give based on your experience? Yeah,
listen, based on my experience, it took much longer for me to make that transition than I had really ever thought. I kind of thought one state would smoothly move into another one. That I'd step down to CEO, and then, I'd pick other stuff up. you know, and then I'd have this, and it took years for that to happen. So first of all, I think it's be realistic about the time frame and cut yourself a bit of slack if it's not. And I didn't do that. I drove myself mad at a time when I should have been going, you know what, I've worked really, really hard. I've achieved more than I ever could have expected to or wanted to when I was sitting writing horoscopes age 17. Look at all of this. I should have relaxed for a bit and just gone, let's just see what happens. And I didn't really. I was always a bit uptight about not doing anything and feeling a bit useless. So try if you can, and I wasn't good at it, to cut yourself some slack. Appreciate it will take longer. Start earlier. So I think that was the other thing. I waited until I wasn't a CEO anymore before I went, right, okay, great, I've moved on from that stage. What can I do now? And inevitably, that's why these things take longer. So I think if you're thinking, I'm going to be retiring in a year or two and I need to think what I want to do in that time, start working on it now. Start speaking to people around. Start telling them you're going to be retiring or you're going to be stepping down from that role in a year or two. Start to try and find some of those bridges into your new career. And I think thirdly, something I didn't do well was been happily married now for over 30 years. I have the most amazing wife, and I didn't really involve her in that decision. And so her expectations of what life would be like once I sold the business and stepped down as CEO, because she had supported me to work my socks off. Do you know what I mean? She'd taken the weight at home. You know, she'd made all the sacrifices. Listen, I'd done all the hard work at work, but it was not coal mining. I mean, it was great fun. You know, I'd done all of that, taken all the strain of those things, but she'd taken every other bit of strain. She'd taken the most of it. And I never really, my plans to her were opaque because they were opaque to me. So what her view of what life would be like afterwards, it turns out, for the very first time in our married lives, wasn't what my view was as well. I forgot to properly consult her. And I really regret doing that. It's the maddest thing. And so that has taken kind of, you know, working through, you know, and reconciling. And so of all of these things, that would be my number one piece of advice, because it was the number one thing that I didn't do well enough that I really wish I had.
Amazing. I mean, I think that's a fantastic way to end this conversation, with this amazing message of appreciation to the people. They are close to us, they are supporting, and most of the time they're in the background. And maybe, as you say, if we involve them more, and I think something that happens to many leaders, I would say, primarily men, is the fact that maybe we don't open up enough because we think that maybe it's boring talking about the business, or it's not something interesting. And I realize even myself is the more you open up with your wife about what you're up to, it's not just great because you have more ideas, more thoughts, and different perspective, but also because you involve your partner to your life, in your business life, which I think is important, because no matter what you do, I think that's an amazing message. Mike, that was an amazing, as expected, conversation. I suppose people can find you on LinkedIn. You are quite active. You have a good engagement. So is there the right place for people to connect that want to?
I'm purposefully active on LinkedIn. I'm purposefully active because about a year and a half ago, I wasn't, and I didn't really like the platform, and I didn't really get it. Yes. And I made a decision that I wanted to figure out how it could work, because it should be a really good thing. And so I just wanted to create better content on there. So yes, LinkedIn is a great place, and I always accept all inquiries and chances to link up with people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike, for being on the show.
Thank you so much. That was great.